Welcome to the Tank Guide Life podcast. Today, we've got this massive stack of notes in front of us, and we are doing a complete deep dive into the world of freshwater aquarium plants. And, looking through all this research, what immediately stands out to me is just this crazy biological reality.
Oh, yeah, it's wild.
Like, when you put a live plant into a glass box full of water, you are not just decorating, you're literally terraforming the tank. You're altering the physics and the chemistry of that whole environment.
That terraforming concept is honestly, it's the perfect place to start. Because, well, the conventional wisdom in the aquarium hobby usually treats plants as like an afterthought, right? Just sort of this visual background noise for the fish.
Yeah, like plastic castles or whatever.
Exactly. But this deep dive really points to a totally different philosophy. Live plants are, they're the primary biological engine of an aquatic ecosystem. They change the water chemistry, they buffer against crashes, and they actually profoundly alter the behavior of the fish by giving them real natural shelter.
Right. It's functional biology, not just aesthetics. And the core mission of this deep dive, the whole thesis we want to get across to you listening right now, is that success breeds success. We're building a masterclass for beginners today.
Stripping away all the gatekeeping.
Totally. The intimidating jargon, the crazy expensive gear. We're focusing heavily on low-tech setups, carpeting strategies, and just figuring out why certain plants will forgive your beginner mistakes. Because, you can achieve a lush ecosystem without a degree in chemistry.
Or a massive budget for, injected CO2 equipment.
Yes. So to understand how to actually get that success, we have to start with the baseline mechanics. Like, what is actually happening in the water? Your notes have this huge section on living filtration and the nitrogen cycle.
Right. So let's break that down. In any enclosed aquatic system, the fish eat food and they excrete waste. That waste, along with, decaying organic matter like uneaten food, it introduces ammonia into the water.
Which is super toxic.
Lethally toxic, yeah. But in a cycle tank, you have autotrophic beneficial bacteria that process that ammonia into nitrate, which is also toxic, and then finally into nitrate.
And nitrate is kind of the end of the line for that bacterial cycle, right? Like, it's less toxic than ammonia, sure, but it's not completely harmless?
No, not at all. If it just continuously builds up, it causes chronic physiological stress for the fish. It compromises their immune systems over time.
And traditionally, the only way a hobbyist gets rid of that nitrate is by, grabbing a plastic bucket and physically changing the water every week.
Yeah.
Like the old saying, dilution is the solution to pollution.
Right. But the research introduces this amazing biological alternative, which is the source sink dynamic. If we look at the cellular mechanics, the aquarium water is the source. It holds a high concentration of dissolved nitrogen, and the plant tissue acts as the sink.
Okay, so the plants are pulling it in.
Exactly. Plants need massive amounts of nitrogen to synthesize amino acids, which are the building blocks for proteins. And specifically, they need it to build the porphyrin ring of the chlorophyll molecule. Without nitrogen, they literally cannot photosynthesize.
Wow, okay. So they aren't just sitting there looking pretty. They're actively stripping the water of these compounds just to fuel their own growth. And I noticed the notes mention some specific enzymatic pathways here.
Yeah, this is a really crucial detail. When a plant absorbs nitrate from the water, it can't just use it right away. It has to spend energy to convert it. It uses an enzyme called nitrate reductase to convert nitrate into nitrate, and then another one, nitrate reductase, to turn that into ammonium.
Okay, so it's working hard for this.
Very hard. It's an energy-intensive process. So because of this, the metabolic rate of the plant directly dictates how much nitrogen it pulls from the water. Faster growth equals higher metabolic demand, which means superior water purification.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Which brings us to, the ultimate biological vacuum cleaner mentioned in the sources, which is duckweed.
Oh, duckweed. Yeah.
You highlighted this floating plant because its growth rate is almost incomprehensible. It can double its entire biomass in 24 to 48 hours.
It's explosive. And the mechanism behind that is basically twofold. First, duckweed is made up mostly of meristematic tissue, which is essentially plant stem cells, so it's constantly dividing.
Just nonstop cloning itself.
Pretty much. And second, because it floats on the surface, it breaks the aquatic boundary layer. Submerged plants have to rely on this incredibly slow diffusion of dissolved carbon dioxide through the water. But duckweed's leaves are exposed directly to the air.
So it has unlimited access to atmospheric CO2.
Exactly, which sits at roughly 400 parts per million.
It's running on high-octane fuel, compared to the underwater plants anyway. I saw studies in the notes where duckweed achieved a 56 to 70% nitrogen recovery rate. That is a massive amount of waste being pulled out.
It really is. And it's not the only floater doing this. Water lettuce operates on the exact same principle. In recirculating aquaculture systems, researchers found water lettuce was achieving over 70% nitrate reduction in really short intervals.
Okay, but what if someone listening doesn't want the top of their tank covered in floating plants? The research points to submerged stem plants too, right? Like hornwort and guppy grass.
Yeah, so hornwort is fascinating because it totally lacks a true root system. Instead, it has these modified leaves that absorb nutrients directly from the water column. It functions exactly like a biological sponge. Trials showed it reducing nitrates by over 40% in under a week.
Wait, I need to push back on that sponge analogy for a second.
Sure.
If I wipe up a spill on my kitchen counter with a physical sponge, the sponge absorbs it, right? But if I just leave that wet sponge sitting on the counter, the water is technically still there. It's just trapped inside the sponge. Does this mean the nitrogen is actually still inside the tank?
That is an incredibly perceptive point, and it leads directly into what the notes call the biomass export rule. Yes, the nitrogen is physically locked inside the plant cells, but that storage isn't permanent.
Right, because plants die.
Exactly. If a leaf gets shaded out and dies, or a stem gets crushed, the cell walls rupture. Bacteria immediately break down that organic material, and all the nitrogen the plant works so hard to absorb is released right back into the water as ammonia.
Oh, wow. Meaning we haven't actually removed the waste from the ecosystem. We've just temporarily repackaged it into green leaves.
Precisely. Which is why maintenance is a biological imperative, not just some aesthetic chore. To get true nitrate reduction, you have to physically remove that biomass from the system.
So when I take my aquascaping scissors and I trim back that massive jungle of guppy grass and I scoop it out and throw it in the compost, that is me permanently exporting the nitrogen.
You are exporting the exported waste.
Yeah, that completely changes how I view trimming. It's not landscaping. It's filtration. But the notes do have a big caveat here. This does not mean you can throw out your water-changing buckets.
Oh, absolutely not. The ecosystem thinking we want you to take away from this is that plants create a significantly more stable environment between your water changes, but they don't replace them.
Because plants aren't picking up the solid fish waste.
Right. They don't process solid feces, they don't remove dissolved organic carbon, and crucially, they don't replenish trace minerals, things like calcium and magnesium that the fish are constantly absorbing from the water for their own health.
Okay, so stability is the goal. And speaking of stability, let's transition to how we actually set this up. Because the research heavily pushes this low-tech philosophy. And I think this is so important because modern aquascaping online looks like an arms race of equipment.
It really does. You see these high-tech competition tanks using pressurized gas canisters to inject CO2 right into the water, dropping the pH, hypersaturating the water with carbon.
All to force the plants into this crazy metabolic overdrive. And they have these stadium-level lighting rigs hanging from the ceiling. It looks incredible, but it completely gatekeeps the hobby for beginners.
Oh, 100%. A beginner sees a $1,000 setup and assumes keeping a planted tank is just financially and technically impossible for them.
Which is a myth we are dismantling today. So define a low-tech tank for us based on the notes.
It's very simple. No injected CO2, moderate lighting, slower natural growth, and fundamentally lower maintenance.
And the physics of light play a huge role here, right?
Yeah.
Because the notes talk about PAR, photosynthetically active radiation.
Right. PAR is the specific spectrum of light, mostly the red and blue wavelengths, that chlorophyll actually absorbs to drive photosynthesis. Now, the beginner instinct is always to assume that more light equals more plant growth.
Yeah, if a little light is good, a massive spotlight must be better. So they buy the strongest light and leave it on for 12 hours a day.
But without injected CO2, that intense light becomes a massive liability. The plants are completely bottlenecked. They have this huge influx of photon energy, but they don't have the carbon building blocks in the water to actually use that energy. They hit a metabolic ceiling.
And nature abhors a vacuum, or in this case, unspent energy. So what seizes that opportunity?
Algae.
Of course.
Algae are simple organisms. They don't have the same complex carbon bottlenecks that higher plants do. If you blast a low-tech tank with high PR lighting, the plants physically can't use it, but the algae will exploit it instantly. You get a massive algal bloom.
Which then covers the leaves of the actual plants, blocking the light, choking them out, and starting this horrible death spiral. So the solution in the notes is consistency over intensity.
Exactly. In a low-tech ecosystem, having moderate lighting on a strict automated timer for, say, 6 to 8 hours a day provides exactly the amount of energy the plants need to process the naturally occurring carbon. It leaves no excess energy for the algae.
It's a really elegant balance. And I was reading that this balance should actually start on day one, because there's a huge misconception out there about when to even put the plants in the tank.
Yes. Beginners always think they need to fully cycle the tank first, building up the bacterial colonies for weeks before adding any plants. But the research advocates the exact opposite.
A plant immediately.
Plant on day one. Putting the plants in during the fishless cycle gives the root systems time to anchor into the substrate. They can adapt to your specific tap water chemistry without the added biological pressure of fish swimming around and creating waste.
No, wait. Don't plants actually prefer ammonia anyway?
They absolutely do. Like we discussed earlier, converting nitrate requires a ton of enzymatic energy. But ammonia can be assimilated directly into their amino acid pathways. So by adding plants during the cycling phase, when ammonia levels are intentionally high, you are feeding them perfectly.
Okay, but this brings up the classic beginner anxiety. Contamination.
Ah, the dreaded pet store tanks.
Yeah. Yes. You go to a big box pet store, and they have those murky holding tanks, and buying a plant from there is like aquatic roulette. You bring home a nice fern, and 2 weeks later, you have an explosive population of bladder snails, hair algae everywhere, maybe even fish parasites.
It's a very real fear, and that is exactly where we introduce tissue culture plants, which your notes highlight as the ultimate clean start. This is honestly a fascinating intersection of botany and commercial agriculture.
Yeah, I've seen these. You go to the store and they have these sealed, clear plastic cups sitting on a shelf. They aren't even underwater. It's just tiny plants growing in this clear, gooey gel. How does that even work?
So it all starts in a highly sterile laboratory. Botanists take a microscopic piece of plant tissue, called an explant, and they sterilize the outside completely. Then they place it onto an agar medium.
Agar is like that seaweed gelatin stuff, right?
Exactly. But for these cultures, it's heavily fortified. They pack it with macro and micronutrients, sucrose for energy, and highly specific plant hormones, things like auxins and cytokinins.
Right. And by tweaking those hormones, they can force the plant tissue to rapidly multiply and form brand new miniature plants right there in the cup.
And because this entire process happens inside a sealed, sterile vessel in a lab, the resulting plant is guaranteed to be 100% free of snail eggs, algae spores, and pathogens.
That is so cool. You literally just open the cup, gently rinse the gel off the roots under the tap, and you have a pristine, biologically clean plant ready for your tank. It completely removes the anxiety.
It's a game changer for beginners.
Okay, so we've got our clean, low-tech foundation. Let's get into the actual plants. The sources categorize these really well based on their growth habits. Let's start with the group you dubbed the rhizome gang.
I love that name.
Right, Anubias, Java fern, and Bucephalandra.
These three are the absolute backbone of low-tech aquascaping. They are incredibly adaptable, mostly because of their unique anatomical structure. The defining feature for all of them is the rhizome.
We hear that term thrown around constantly, but what actually is a rhizome, functionally speaking? Because when I look at Anubias, it just looks like a really thick green root, like a piece of ginger or something.
Visually, yeah, it looks like a root, but anatomically, it's not a root at all. It's a modified stem that grows horizontally along surfaces instead of vertically. The true roots grow downward from the bottom of this thick stem, and the leaves sprout upward from the top.
Okay, so what does the thick part actually do?
The rhizome itself is packed with parenchyma cells, which the plant uses as a massive storage vault. It stores starches and complex proteins in there.
Oh, so it's like an energy battery.
Exactly like a battery. And that battery is the reason these plants are so forgiving. If the plant experiences a ton of stress, like a sudden temperature drop, or you forget to fertilize, it just draws on those stored starches to survive. It can outlast periods of adversity that would instantly kill a fast-growing stem plant.
That makes them sound invincible. But there's a catch, isn't there? The notes say there is one non-negotiable rule that beginners break constantly.
Yes. And it leads to total catastrophic failure.
You must never bury the rhizome.
Never.
So let's explain why. If I take a beautiful Anubias and I push that thick green stem deep into my sand, what physically happens to it?
It suffocates, and then it rots. You see substrates in an aquarium, especially fine sand or compacted gravel, they quickly become anaerobic just a few millimeters below the surface.
Anaerobic meaning there's no dissolved oxygen down there.
Right, and the rhizome absolutely requires constant access to oxygenated water for cellular respiration. If you bury it in that anaerobic zone, the tissue necrotizes. It breaks down into this mushy, foul-smelling paste. The leaves detach and float away, and the whole plant just disintegrates.
So if we can't bury them, what do we do with them? The notes call them epiphytic plants.
Yeah, epiphytes. In their natural habitats in places like West Africa or Southeast Asia, they don't grow in dirt. They grow attached to river stones or fallen tree branches in the water.
Okay, so how do we replicate that at home?
You attach the rhizome directly to your hardscape. You can take a piece of cotton thread or fishing line and just gently tie the rhizome to a piece of driftwood. Or honestly, the standard practice today is just to use cyanoacrylate.
Which is literally just standard aquarium safe superglue.
Just super glue, yeah. You put a small dab on the rhizome, press it against a rock, and you're done. Over the next few months, the true roots will grow down and wrap themselves around the rock, anchoring the plant with incredible strength.
It looks so natural, like an aged riverbed.
It really does. Now, while Anubias is very slow and steady, your notes point out a really specific kind of terrifying quirk about Java fern that constantly sends beginners into an absolute panic.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
You've seen it?
Yes.
Yeah.
As a Java fern matures, you'll suddenly see these rows of dark brown, almost fuzzy spots appearing on the underside of the leaves. And the immediate reaction is, oh my God, my plant has a parasitic infection, or it's dying of a nutrient deficiency.
It looks exactly like an aggressive disease.
It's horrifying the first time you see it.
But it's actually a fascinating reproductive mechanism. Those brown spots are called sori, which are clusters of sporangia. Remember, Java fern is a true fern. It doesn't make flowers or seeds. It reproduces via spores.
Like mushrooms.
Exactly. So in the aquarium, those scary brown spots will eventually sprout entirely new, miniature Java ferns right out of the tissue of the mother leaf.
It's so alien. The mother leaf literally sacrifices itself. It kind of decays away, while these tiny baby plantlets grow their own microscopic rhizomes and roots, and then they eventually break off, float through the water, and snag onto another piece of wood to start over.
It's a sign of a thriving plant, not a dying one.
That is such a relief to know.
Yeah.
So moving away from the epiphytes, your research takes us into the exact opposite strategy, the heavy root feeders.
Right. This group includes the massive Amazon swords and the incredibly diverse cryptocoryne family, commonly known as crypts.
Now, unlike the rhizome gang, these guys demand to be buried. But how do we actually feed them down there? Because a beginner usually assumes that plain aquarium gravel, or, that aesthetic white sand you buy, has zero nutritional value.
Which is true. Plain sand is totally inert.
So the assumption is that you have to spend vast amounts of money on specialized, nutrient-dense aquasoils, those baked clay balls packed with ammonia and minerals.
Look, aquasoils are fantastic products, they really are, but the notes emphasize that they're not strictly necessary for a low-tech setup. You can absolutely grow massive Amazon swords and lush fields of crypts in cheap pool filter sand or basic gravel.
But how? Where do they get the food?
The biological workaround here relies on understanding cation exchange capacity, or CEC.
Okay, let's unpack the chemistry of CEC, because I feel like this is where the magic actually happens underground.
It is. So when you look at plant nutrition, a lot of the essential nutrients exist in the water as positively charged ions, which we call cations. Potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron. These are all cations.
Right, they all carry a positive electrical charge.
Right. So when you push a fertilizer pill into the substrate or root tab, which is just a compressed pill of these nutrients, the tab starts to dissolve.
And if the substrate couldn't hold those nutrients, they would just leach straight up into the water column.
Right.
And feed the algae.
Precisely. But even inert substrates, especially once organic mulm builds up in them over time, they carry a slight negative electrical charge, and opposites attract.
Oh, so the negatively charged sand particles act like magnets.
Yes, they bind to the positively charged nutrient cations. They hold them there, magnetically trapped in the soil matrix.
And the roots of the Amazon sword have evolved to exploit this magnetic trap. The notes explain that the plant literally pumps hydrogen ions out of its root hairs into the surrounding soil. Because hydrogen also carries a positive charge, it swaps places with the nutrient cations attached to the sand.
It's an exquisite system of chemical bartering. The plant trades a hydrogen ion for a potassium ion, absorbing the nutrient directly into its vascular system.
So by shoving root tabs deep into plain sand, you are loading the substrate with cations. The Amazon sword builds this massive invasive root network that acts like a localized extraction grid. You get explosive plant growth without dumping liquid fertilizer into the water above, so you starve out the algae.
It's brilliant, isn't it?
It's incredible. But this root feeding group also includes a plant that forces literally every beginner to question their life choices. The cryptocarine.
Oh, crits.
Your notes dedicate a massive warning to this phenomenon known universally in the hobby as crypt melt.
It is an initiation rite for every planted tank owner. There is no escaping it.
Walk us through the trauma. What happens?
Okay, so you go to the store and you purchase this vibrant, bushy, beautiful cryptocarine. You bring it home, you carefully bury the root system, you give it root tabs, and you step back to admire your work.
Feeling very proud of yourself.
Very proud. But within 3 to 5 days, the leaves begin to look slightly transparent, and then they just collapse entirely. They turn into this gelatinous, melting mush that dissolves right into the water. It literally looks like someone poured acid into your tank.
And the beginner immediately assumes they failed. They killed it.
Yep.
So they pull the decaying, gross root ball out of the tank and throw it in the trash.
Which is the worst thing you can do. Because your research explains exactly why this melt happens, and it goes all the way back to how these plants are commercially farmed.
Right. The vast majority of aquatic plants sold globally are grown immersed. Huge commercial farms in Florida and Southeast Asia, they grow these plants in massive, super humid greenhouses, but not underwater. The roots are flooded in trays, but the leaves are exposed to the open air.
And why do they do that? Why not grow aquatic plants? Aquatically.
Carbon access and algae prevention, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Immersed plants have access to that atmospheric CO2 we talked about, so they grow exponentially faster. And growing them in the air completely eliminates the risk of an algae outbreak ruining the crop. But this creates a major anatomical disparity.
Let's look at the cellular structure of those leaves. When a crypt grows in the air, it develops a thick, waxy cuticle on the surface of the leaf to prevent dehydration.
Mm-hmm.
And it develops hundreds of stomata-tiny pores on the underside of the leaf to rapidly exchange gases with the air.
So what happens when you take that highly specialized aerial leaf and you shove it under 20 inches of aquarium water?
Its entire biological operating system crashes. The thick wax prevents it from absorbing dissolved minerals, and the pores are useless for extracting the much lower concentrations of CO2 in the water. The plant recognizes that its current leaves are a complete metabolic liability.
So it intentionally hits the self-destruct button. It triggers cellular apoptosis. It actively breaks down its own leaves, withdrawing whatever mobile nutrients it can salvage back down into the rhizome, and it sheds the dead tissue.
That is crypt melt. It's not death. It is an aggressive, energy-intensive survival strategy. The rhizome and the roots under the sand are completely alive.
They are just shutting down the factory to retool the assembly line. Within a week or two, if you just leave it alone, it will push up entirely new leaves, and they'll look visibly different. Thinner, more textured, built explicitly to pull dissolved carbonates right from the water.
So the golden rule here for anyone listening: when your crypt melts, gently siphon out the dead mush so it doesn't spike your ammonia levels, but do not touch the roots. Have patience. The plant will resurrect itself.
Patience is definitely the recurring theme today. And, moving from the bottom of the tank up into the water column, your notes introduce the stem plants. Things like Bacopa, Ludwigia repens, water wisteria. These guys behave very differently from the root feeders.
Right, while a sword pulls nutrients from below, stem plants pull a huge portion of their nutrition directly from the water through their leaves and through these little adventitious roots that sprout right off the stem.
And because they feed from the water column, this is where we have to finally talk about liquid fertilizers.
The confusing bottles of blue and green liquid at the pet store.
Exactly. When you dose a liquid fertilizer, you're adding completely dissolved, bioavailable macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the classic NPK ratio, along with micronutrients like iron, manganese, and zinc.
The iron is particularly interesting in your notes. Iron is notoriously unstable in water. It quickly oxidizes into a solid form that plants can't even absorb. Basically, it turns into microscopic rust floating in your tank.
To prevent that rust, high-quality liquid fertilizers use chelated iron. The iron molecule is wrapped in an organic, claw-like EDTA that protects it from oxidizing until the plant leaf can actually absorb it.
It's brilliant chemistry.
Yeah.
But liquid dosing brings us right back to that biological arms race we mentioned earlier. If I just dump heavy doses of liquid NPK into my low-tech tank, I am saturating the water with food.
Right. And if you only have slow-growing plants like Anubias and Java fern, they cannot upregulate their metabolism fast enough to consume all that fertilizer.
So the algae, which is always just waiting in the wings,
Mhm.
utilizes it immediately. Boom, green water.
Which is why your research poses this highly practical diagnostic question that everyone should ask themselves. Are you feeding your plants or are you feeding your algae?
That's a great way to frame it.
In a low-tech ecosystem, lean dosing is superior. You start with half or even a quarter of whatever the manufacturer recommends on the bottle, and then you just watch the new growth on your plants.
Right, if the new leaves look pale, or if you see little pinholes developing, which I read as a classic sign of potassium deficiency, then you slowly, incrementally increase the dose.
You are calibrating the chemical inputs to exactly match the biological uptake of your specific tank.
Okay, let's transition into what is arguably the most intimidating yet highly desired aspect of plant and tanks that we've got in these sources, the low-tech carpet.
Oh, the carpet, the holy grail.
When anyone searches for aquascaping online, they are immediately hit with images of Iwagumi-style tanks. These minimalist, beautiful landscapes with giant stones rising out of a flawless, manicured, dense green lawn that covers every single inch of the dirt.
And the pervasive myth in the hobby is that a carpet like that is literally impossible without $1,000 of CO2 gear and massive stadium lights.
But your research shatters that myth. You absolutely can grow a full carpet in a low-tech environment. The trade-off is not technical complexity. The trade-off is just time.
Time and patience. A high-tech system is running on jet fuel, carpeting a tank in 4 weeks. A low-tech system is walking. It might take 6 months to form a cohesive lawn.
So to understand how to achieve this, we need to look at the mechanics of horizontal growth. True carpeting plants spread via stolons, which we normally just call runners. They're these specialized lateral stems that creep along just beneath the surface of the sand.
Right, so when a carpeting plant is growing, it has a main vertical shoot. And this shoot produces hormones called auxins at its growing tip. These auxins naturally suppress lateral branching. It's called apical dominance. The plant naturally wants to grow straight up toward the light before it bothers growing out.
But when we provide sufficient lighting, even just good moderate lighting in a low-tech setup, the plant senses that vertical stretching isn't necessary anymore. It has enough light.
Exactly. The apical dominance is reduced, and a different hormone, cytokinins, triggers the buds at the base of the plant to push outward horizontally. The runner extends a few inches away from the mother plant, pushes roots down into the substrate, and shoots a brand new set of leaves up.
Then that baby plant becomes a mother plant, sending out its own runners.
Right.
And it just geometric progressions across the tank.
Now, before we dive into the specific carpeting plants, your notes contain a massive contradiction regarding one specific species, Monte Carlo.
Oh, the Monte Carlo debate. Yeah, half the literature out there claims Monte Carlo is the absolute best, easiest carpet for beginners. The other half screams that it is a trap that will inevitably die without injected CO2. Who is right?
Well, the contradiction exists because both statements are highly context-dependent. If we're looking purely at the advanced class of tiny, tightly packed carpeting plants, a group that includes H.C. cuba and Glossostigma, Monte Carlo is undeniably the most forgiving of that specific group.
Okay, so H.C. cuba will just melt and disintegrate in a low-tech tank, but Monte Carlo will survive.
It will survive, but will it thrive? That is the caveat. In a low-tech setup, Monte Carlo often struggles to root deeply, and its lateral spread slows to an absolute crawl. It's prone to being shaded by its own sluggish growth, which leads to the bottom layers rotting, and then the entire carpet just uproots and floats to the surface.
Oh, that sounds so frustrating. It's the easiest of the hard plants, but it's still a hard plant.
Precisely. Which brings us to the actual recommendations in your research. The 5 best low-tech carpeting plants that rely on biological resilience rather than high-tech crutches. Plant number 1, dwarf Sagittaria.
Oh, dwarf sag.
Yeah.
It's a true workhorse. It looks exactly like thick blades of underwater grass, and it has a highly aggressive runner network. Once its roots tap into those root tabs we buried in the sand, it will throw out runners constantly.
But the biology of its light response is fascinating. If the PAR levels at the substrate are too low, the apical dominance reasserts itself. The plant stretches vertically to find energy. Instead of a tight 2-inch lawn, you might wake up to an 8-inch jungle of tall grass.
Right, so to prevent that, you have to ensure your light is actually penetrating the water column all the way to the bottom, and you should plant it pretty densely from the very beginning.
Good strategy. Now, the second plant on your list is the pygmy chainsword, Helantium tenellum.
This operates a lot like dwarf sag, but the aesthetic is totally different. While sag looks like thick crabgrass, pygmy chainsword has these incredibly fine, delicate, almost translucent leaves.
It doesn't create a manicured golf course look at all. It creates this chaotic, natural, flowing meadow.
And it's a massive root feeder. So loading the substrate with those CEC-bound nutrients is critical.
Plant number 3 is Marsilea hirsuta, which belongs to a fascinating family of aquatic ferns. Unlike the grass-like appearance of the first two, Marsilea produces these tiny little leaves that look exactly like dark green 4-leaf clovers.
But your notes highlight this plant as the ultimate test of psychological endurance for a beginner.
Oh, it truly is. Marsilea operates almost entirely out of sight for the first 2 months. When you plant it, it doesn't seem to do anything. Beginners always assume it's dead.
Just a tiny clover sitting in the dirt doing nothing.
But beneath the soil, it is expending massive amounts of energy building this vast, interconnected network of underground rhizomes and runners. Once that invisible infrastructure is complete, it will suddenly push up hundreds of tiny clovers simultaneously, carpeting the tank incredibly fast from below.
It demands blind faith from the hobbyist. You just have to trust the process. Moving to plant number 4, we have kind of a biological hack: pearlweed. Now, I want to challenge this classification because pearlweed isn't a carpeting plant at all. It's a stem plant. It grows straight up to the surface.
You are entirely correct. In its natural growth habit, it wants to reach the top. But aquarists have learned to completely hijack its biology. Because it grows at an explosive rate, even in low-tech setups, you can force it to carpet through sheer mechanical manipulation.
By ruthlessly trimming it.
Exactly. We discussed apical dominance. By taking scissors and cutting the top half off the pearlweed stem every single one, you are physically removing that auxin-producing tip. Without that hormone-suppressing lateral growth, the plant is forced to branch out sideways.
Furthermore, you take all those trimmings you just cut, and you simply push them right back into the substrate next to the original stems.
Every trimming grows roots and becomes a new plant. It's essentially manual propagation on a massive scale.
It requires constant hands-on maintenance, like you'll be trimming a lot. But it's arguably the cheapest and fastest way to build a dense, bright green carpet without CO2.
And finally, your notes bring us to the ultimate low-maintenance carpet, Cryptocorin parva.
We talked about cryptmelt earlier, but parva is unique. It's a rosette plant, meaning all its leaves originate from a central crown. It stays incredibly tiny, rarely getting taller than 1.5 inches. So it naturally stays compact and never stretches vertically like dwarf sag, and you never have to trim it like pearlweed.
It sounds like a perfect plant, but the biological trade-off is its metabolic rate. Cryptocorin parva is agonizingly, painfully slow. It might produce 1 new leaf a month.
Wow. So to achieve a full carpet of parva in a low-tech tank, you either have to spend a fortune buying hundreds of tissue culture pots to plant a dense grid on day 1,
or you must be willing to wait over a year for the tiny runners to slowly map their way across the substrate.
It's the tortoise in the race, for sure. Which actually brings us to a really fascinating conceptual leap in your research. We've covered the substrate with carpets, the midground with epiphytes, the background with stems, the surface with floaters. But your notes highlight a massive, highly efficient loophole in aquatic filtration.
Terrestrial houseplants, the riparium concept.
Yes. This completely breaks the boundaries of the glass box.
The biology here is incredibly powerful. As we discussed way back with duckweed, the limiting factor for underwater plants is the slow diffusion rate of gases in water. The boundary layer of water physically slows down gas exchange by a factor of 10,000 compared to air.
10,000. So by taking a terrestrial houseplant, submerging its root system directly into the aquarium water, or sticking it in the back of your hang-on-back filter, and letting its leaves grow out into the ambient air of your living room, you bypass that boundary layer entirely.
The plant has access to 400 parts per million of atmospheric CO2. It has access to unlimited oxygen in the air for cellular respiration at night. And because of this unfettered access, its metabolic engine runs at absolute maximum capacity.
To fuel that explosive growth above the water, the roots below the water act as supercharged vacuums, pulling massive quantities of nitrate and phosphate out of the aquarium.
Your research points to water spinach as an industrial example used heavily in aquaponics. When grown emergently like this, it achieves nitrate removal rates exceeding 70%. But for the home aquarium, your notes list much more accessible options.
Like pothos. Pothos is the undisputed king of the home riparium. It is nearly indestructible. You take a cutting from your living room plant, make sure a node, that little brown bump on the stem, is underwater, and within days it fires these thick white aquatic roots down into the tank.
Monstera, philodendron, and syngonium, the arrowhead plant, they operate on the exact same principles. They develop massive, intricate root systems that not only filter the water, but create these incredible tangled jungle habitats for fish to swim through. It looks amazing.
And your notes do mention the peace lily, but there is a critical anatomical warning here.
Yes, the peace lily is an emergent marginal plant. Its roots are perfectly adapted to flooded anaerobic mud. However, its leaves and its crown, which is where the stems meet the roots, are highly susceptible to rot if they are submerged continuously.
So the roots must be in the water, but the crown must be elevated completely above the water line. You can suspend it in a little aquaponic basket or wedge it into some driftwood sticking out of the top.
Now, as amazing as a giant pothos vine is at sucking up nitrates, we have to debunk a highly dangerous myth that circulates constantly online.
Oh, I know the one. You see people post a picture of a tank with a massive houseplant growing out of it, and the caption says, "I don't need a filter anymore, and I never do water changes."
That is a profound misunderstanding of closed system chemistry. A massive root system removes dissolved inorganic nitrogen and phosphorus. It does absolutely nothing to remove dissolved organic carbon, phenols, or the physical particulate matter of decaying food and fish poop.
Right, the solid waste is still just rotting at the bottom.
Furthermore, that explosive plant growth is actively stripping the water of essential trace minerals like calcium, magnesium, and iron. The plants are eating the minerals that the fish desperately need for osmoregulation and skeletal growth.
So if you never do a water change, the water becomes biologically depleted. It becomes dead water. The plants are a powerful supplement to your biological filtration. They are not a replacement for mechanical filtration or your routine maintenance.
Exactly. Pulling all of these disparate elements together is where the true art of aquascaping and ecosystem management lies. And your notes synthesize this into a really cohesive strategy.
The structural philosophy is pretty simple. You organize the biology by zones. The foreground, right up against the front glass, is strictly for your slow-creeping, low-tech carpets like Marsilea or Crypt parva, making sure the visual depth of the tank remains unobstructed.
The midground is where you place your hardscape. You utilize the crevices in the wood and rock to glue your slow-growing Anubias and Java fern, keeping their sensitive rhizomes elevated in the oxygenated currents.
And you use your heavy root-feeding cryptocoryons to bridge the transition between the sand and the hardscape, utilizing root tabs to feed them locally.
And the background is reserved for the massive biological engines, the Amazon swords driving deep into the substrate, or thick curtains of Vallisneria.
Vallisneria is great. It spreads rapidly via runners to create this dense forest of vertical blades along the back glass. It provides crucial sightline breaks for territorial fish and amazing shelter for fry.
But even with a perfect blueprint, the transition from paper to practice is fraught. Let's look at the failure points you documented, the most common mistakes beginners make that crash the whole ecosystem.
Okay, mistake number 1. Impatience in selection. Buying advanced plants like HC Cuba or super-sensitive red stem plants for a low-tech setup, assuming you can just force them to adapt. You can't outwill biology.
Mistake number 2, which we cannot stress enough, burying the epiphytes. Pushing a Java fern rhizome into the sand is a guaranteed death sentence.
Mistake number 3. The PIR mismatch. Blasting the tank with high-intensity light for 12 hours a day without injected CO2, creating a massive carbon bottleneck and feeding a catastrophic algae bloom.
Mistake number 4. Chemical saturation. Pouring heavy doses of liquid fertilizers into a tank populated only by slow-growing plants. Again, feeding the algae instead of the plants. Lean dosing and observation are key.
And mistake number 5. Psychological defeat. Expecting your low-tech ecosystem to look like an artificial manicured CO2 competition tank in 3 weeks. Panicking when the crypts melt, tearing up the carpet because it hasn't spread in a month, just giving up too early.
And this all circles back to the final, most crucial concept in your research, ecosystem thinking. A planted tank is not a collection of isolated products. It's all connected.
Intimately. The cation exchange capacity of the substrate, the spectrum of the lighting, the chelated iron in the fertilizer, the nitrogen output of the fish, the atmospheric gas exchange of the floaters, and the bacterial colonies in your filter, they are all inexorably linked.
You change one variable, and the entire biological equation shifts. If you aggressively trim your massive Amazon sword, you suddenly increase the light hitting the substrate, which might trigger your dwarf Sagittaria to spread horizontally instead of vertically, while simultaneously reducing the tank's overall nitrogen uptake, leaving more nutrients in the water column for algae. It is a constantly breathing, shifting web.
Managing that web requires observation and record keeping. Because, let's be honest, the human brain is terrible at tracking minor chemical fluctuations over months, which is why having a physical tracking system is so incredibly valuable. And, just as a lightly helpful mention for anyone wanting to implement this ecosystem approach, tools like the Daily Tank Journal, Planet Edition, are fantastic for this. I actually saw you can grab it as a digital PDF over on the FishkeepingLifeCo Etsy store, or get a physical copy through thetankguide.com. It's not about being obsessive, it's about having a baseline.
Right. When you track your dosing schedule alongside your plant growth, you stop guessing. You start learning the specific, unique language of your own ecosystem, because every single tank is chemically and biologically unique. There is no universal formula, only universal principles.
So synthesizing everything we've covered today from this incredible stack of notes, you, listening right now, absolutely have the capability to build a thriving underwater landscape.
Start clean with sterile tissue cultures.
Respect the anatomy of the rhizome.
Exploit the CEC of your substrate with targeted root tabs.
Understand that low-tech carpets are a test of endurance, not skill.
And use the explosive growth of terrestrial houseplants to turbocharge your filtration.
I love it. Now, to wrap up, I know you had a final thought you wanted to leave everyone with, kind of reframes this entire hobby.
I do. We spend hours staring through the glass at the fish. We name them, we feed them, we focus all our attention on them. But the reality of the biome you are creating is vastly different. As your Amazon sword drives its roots deep into the sand, it is physically altering the chemical gradients of the substrate. As your Vallisneria multiplies, its leaves are literally changing the hydrodynamic flow of the filter currents. As your pothos pulls nitrates from the water, it is manipulating the very toxicity of the environment.
Wow. They are the true architects of the world inside that glass box.
Exactly. The fish are merely visitors. They are reacting to the environment the plants are actively constructing and maintaining. So the next time you sit in front of your tank, look past the fish and ask yourself, who is really in charge of that ecosystem?
Man, that is a profound perspective shift. The plants are running the show. Thank you so much for breaking down this massive stack of research with us, and thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope you feel completely empowered to start your own planted tank without all the fear and the jargon. Have patience, respect the biology, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.